That brings us to item number 13, the discussion of Piney Woods Elementary School, the update on Piney Woods. I'm going to allow the team that is here for that to come to the table. We also have the very proud principal, Ms. Pascal, with us tonight. Thank you for being here. Dr. Melton, would you like to introduce no, that's the chair for Mr. Neal. Do you want to introduce Mr. Neal?
Sir, thank you, Mr. Cates. Actually, I'll ask Mr. Neal to make sure the introductions are made of the team in its entirety. Our process for this evening is the presenter of the slide will be at the podium, and then, of course, the rest of the team is available to answer questions when it comes time for discussion. So, Mr. Neal, if you would take the honors of introducing our team to make sure by name and position, our team that's here this evening, to make sure that everyone knows not just the faces and names, but also the roles they have in this process of Piney Woods Elementary.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Immediately my left is Mr. Greg Hughes. He's the president of Contract Construction. Mr. Doug Quackenbush, who is the principal architect on the project. Mike Montgomery is at the end of the table. And on the wall back there, we have Bobby McLeod from Terracon. We have Bruce Todd, the structural engineer, and we have Chris Patrick, the electrical engineer. If I missed anybody? Oh, we have, I'm sorry, we have two Mr. Farleys over there who are also engaged with contract construction. And I'll let Greg introduce the rep from Knight Ready Mix. Okay, with that, we wanted to bring you up to speed on where we are with Piney Woods. Here we go. This is an update of the rainfall chart. June and August were pretty normal. We got hit pretty hard in July. But the point I want to make with this is that we fought through all this weather, more than 20 inches above normal from December to August. Despite that, the project is on or ahead of schedule, and there have only been 30 deficiencies noted on the project, and all have been resolved. So there are no outstanding deficiencies at this point. With that, I'll turn it over to Greg, who will talk to you in more detail about the project and where we are today.
Thank you, Dan, and thank y'all for having us tonight. So, progress update, structural steel did finish as planned on August 13th. Masonry will complete in its entirety on September the 25th, as 2 weeks ahead of our scheduled plan. Complete roof dry-in will be finished on September 17th. That is 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Windows are being installed and will finish by mid to late October. Painting is already ongoing. Ceiling grids ongoing. Kitchen hoods in. The cooler freezers are installed. The kitchen flooring should be finished by the end of September. And as you have all seen, the road widening has started and is progressing in a safe manner. All of this is setting us up for a guaranteed completion in May 2021. We are on time and we are under budget at this point with absolutely no injuries on the project itself. So we're proud of that fact. I want to run just through aerials just so you can see the progression. The light doesn't do us any justice, but this is October, then November, all from the same vantage point, December, January with the foundations, February drives are in, foundations complete. March you can see slabs being poured. April walls begin to come up. May more CMU block. Then June you start seeing some roof deck going on. July more roofing, more masonry. August roofing nearing completion. And then that's what the finished product will look like. So it's been a tough road with the pandemic and the excessive weather. We've worked together as a team and been able to keep the project on track and where it is today. And with that, very simply, I'd like to open it up for questions, and I'll take any and all that you have.
Thank you. We will open the floor up for questions. Are there questions? Mr. White?
I had a couple questions. I think we had started on June 15th, and y'all had asked me to wait until some of the folks got better prepared. But my questions stem from a letter dated March 24th, 2020 that Mr. Lovelace had submitted to the Dr. Melton, and I think it was shared with the board, and it was a number of points that he was questioning the work product of your company, and I put that on the record. It's a part of the minutes on June 15th, 2020, and then also put in a response that Contract Construction had on April 20th, 2020, and we started down there, and then it. I think, the request was that I wait and let the folks get better prepared. And I guess the question, can I ask generally questions to our experts? And I know, Dan, you're our engineer that handles this and coordinates this, but you're not the only, and you work for the district, correct? Okay, so you don't work for Contract Construction. And we also have an inspection company called Terracon. Are they here tonight? Okay. And these folks are professional engineers that sign off on all this work product?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And in terms of professional liability, is it Terracon that has the responsibility for the things you sign off on in terms of their malpractice policy?
Yes, they do.
Okay. So that is our expert that I guess you're an expert, but you're an intermediary, and I know you come to meetings and sometimes you've been in executive session and et cetera, but for the most part, you're like an intermediary, but Terracon is sort of the big principal that comes in and reviews all this work.
That's correct.
Okay.
They have people generally on site every day.
Okay. Now, as you're aware, Mr. Lovelace is a contractor, and this, I guess, has generated a lot of questions from him, but does your firm have any relationships? Do y'all do any work together with Mr. Lovelace's firm?
Oh, absolutely. We're currently doing the SLED forensics lab together.
So who works for who?
We're the general contractor, and he's the concrete subcontractor.
So you subcontracted with Mr. Lovelace?
We did.
And when did that contract come into existence?
I believe December or January, I would say, somewhere in there. I believe
Of
that's
2019, 2020?
right. No, 2020, December 19 or January 2020, that's when we started the project.
And so when was that contract bid?
October of 19.
19? So Mr. Lovelace is actually, as a seated board member, bidding on a contract with your company, and you're a vendor of the district. And then he was awarded a contract to work for you.
That's correct.
And what's the dollar amount of that contract?
Slightly over $1.2 million, I believe.
So he has a $1.2 million financial relationship with Contract Construction?
Subcontract relationship.
Subcontract.
Yes.
Okay. Just curious, in construction industry, what kind of profit margins do people make on that kind of contract?
It's no telling. They're less and less these days, but I would say 10 to 15%.
10 to 15%,
Yeah.
okay. In terms of this letter, I guess there's a lot of discussion in here about, number one, the depths of ditches, and I'm assuming when Ms. Lovelace was speaking tonight at public participation, she might have been talking about y'all's ditches. But there was discussion in ditches, and I think your responses were they weren't, that Mr. Lovelace had made some assumptions because the pictures that were taken were actually on the outside of the property, where the property's fenced in.
Yeah, the vantage point just was totally false or misleading, let's put it that way. It may have appeared that way. The ditch was 40 inches deep. In no way was that employee put at risk.
And so, Dan, you're signing off, and then Terracon is signing off on all the work product, too, that's being done even though that might have been a process. But when they make those conclusions, you're concurring. Do you visit the site as well?
Sure, not nearly as often as they do, but I'm on the site every week probably, and we have a progress meeting, scheduled progress meeting as well.
And I see your letter of April 20th, 2020 that I put on the record as well on June 15th, 2020, where you basically were concurring with their conclusions, but there was a lot of discussion in here over concrete being used in, electrical boxes or electrical duct banks. And there was a lot of debate over whether that had to be done with pressure testing and et cetera. But, and the last time I was asking you about the engineer, I think Chris Patrick is the engineer of record, who said that these were erroneous interpretations by Mr. Lovelace. Is that the conclusion?
Two separate issues. My mic may not be on.
You got to turn it on, Doug.
There's an issue of the civil work, which is curb and gutter, and the issue of the electrical conduit. We have the electrical engineer of record and the civil engineer
Mr.
of record.
Quackovich, if you'll just hold 1 second till
To turn
Mr.
the
Giano
button on.
gets you.
Okay,
Thank
is it
you.
on?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes, so we have, there were questions raised about the appropriateness of the concrete used for curb and gutter, which is under the responsibility of my team, specifically our civil engineer. That's why Bruce Todd is here to speak to those questions. And then also the question of the encasing concrete on the electrical conduit, and that's where Chris Patrick is here as the electrical engineer who did those drawings and those specifications to address any questions, both of which have said they're comfortable with the construction as is.
So what's been done is been done correctly.
Correct.
And Terracon is signing off on that?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. You probably saw a letter from CC&I, they're Terracon's Chapter 1 subcontractor. So, and to clarify kind of the design and liabilities and echelon, we're the construction management at risk. Quackenbush Architects is the designer of record, and they've employed Sims Group, who is the electrical engineer of record, and ADC, which is Bruce Todd, and he is the civil engineer of record. And Terracon is simply making sure that everything is being installed per the plans and specs. So all these folks wrote the plans and specs, and they are liable for the design, and Terracon is the inspection agency on behalf of the owner. They're the third-party objective inspection agency. So if you would like, Chris could come up and talk about specifically the conduit underground and the concrete encasement. But
I've got a question on the conduit in just a minute.
Okay,
But I wanted
sure.
to ask you another general question. And y'all have done how many schools? 100 schools?
over 200,
Over 200 schools.
over $1 billion worth of school
And
projects.
is that predominantly in South Carolina?
All in South Carolina.
All in South Carolina. So is there always somebody that's signing off and inspecting your work on school construction?
Every time,
Every time?
every day.
It's a law.
It's by law?
Yes, sir.
The code.
Is Mr. Lovelace ever engaged, or his firm, to do those inspections on your school sites?
I don't think they do special inspections. I mean, not on our project.
Have you ever been aware of him being hired by an owner to come in and inspect and critique your work?
Not that I'm aware of.
With the work you're working on now, does he write letters like this critiquing your work in your SLED project?
No.
Talking about what you're doing with the. So, is there anything that, if it's required by law, is there a legal standard on who can inspect and sign off on this work?
Yes, sir. You have to be a registered professional engineer or registered architect. You can, if you are certified, without those two criteria. You have to go to school and be certified in a very specific part of the business to be an on-site inspector at all. You still have to have a principal who is a registered engineer or architect to sign off on your work.
So, does Mr. Lovelace, is he credentialed to do that kind of sign-off?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Are there other questions?
Yes, I have some.
Mr. Lovelace?
I'd like to speak to Mr. McLeod. Would you come up here, Bobby?
Sure.
First of all, how are you? I haven't seen you in a long time.
Fine, thank you.
Bobby, is it ever acceptable to put non-conforming materials in a construction project, even if they're not tested?
Could you state that question again,
I
please?
said, is it ever acceptable to put non-conforming materials even on a construction project such as this, a public project, where
That's a call for the engineer of record.
right, okay, well, if you weren't called to test something, but it got put in anyway, do you know, I mean, how would you know that materials were proper?
They can be tested after the fact.
Okay, well, we had, I had the delivery tickets from the night that Miss Baker observed a concrete truck out there working at night. The delivery ticket showed that the material was on site, I think, 210 minutes, even though it had an admixture in it. Okay, and the admixture was a retarder, and I looked up in the DOT manual, and it's beyond the specification. Okay, they added to the truck before Miss Baker saw it. They added 100 gallons of water. Okay, and they still dumped that in a ditch in your conduit, you know, in your conduit duct bank. All right. Would that have been proper to put 100 gallons of water in a 10-yard mix?
Generally not.
Yeah, I don't think it would. Okay, well, when you guys did the soils testing on the site, right?
During construction.
Right, okay, and I realized that they had, that the site out there had some unsatisfactory soils on it that were still, you know, the spec said that you could use them as long as the testing agent was on site and did the test properly. Okay, my question is this. Okay, when Mr. Hughes bid the job, he excluded materials, unsuitable soils from his bid. He excluded that entirely from his bid, which I don't know if that's legal or not in construction management at risk, but usually in contracting, when you're working on public works, you don't exclude things from bids and still get awarded the job. That's usually puts it in non-responsive position, a non-responsive. In other words, they throw your bid out. But anyway, they excluded that from their bid in the site work portion. Okay, your company came out and Kugler Construction did the storm drainage and did the grading on it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Kugler proceeded to put, after they had excluded it, they had a guaranteed maximum price, but excluded unsatisfactory soils. And that happened on September the 9th, okay? And the GMP for the building wasn't approved until December the 9th. Well, the construction on the storm drainage and the grading completed about November the 15th. All right, you had unsuitable soils that were called for in there. To rectify that, they went in and put soil cement stabilization under the parking lot and the driveway. And then they proceeded to come to us on December the 9th and give us a $175,000 ad as an allowance, of which Mr. Hughes said 170 was used. Okay, my question to you is that those soils that were put in there were definitely called for by the specification not to be used on that site. All right, under the building, there was no soil cement stabilization under there at all. So how do we know that under the building if it were required in a parking lot, you know, soil cement stabilization, and the specs in there call for the top 10 inches to be undercut and put back in after a period of time had been passed. How do we know? I know we proof rolled it, but we proof rolled it before they started the footings. So how do we know that that material is still good?
We reviewed all these conditions with the design team and with the geotechnical engineer of record to make sure that everyone understood what those conditions were. To answer your question about the foundations, we examined each and every one of them individually.
I saw the test reports, and I understand you did that. I'm not questioning that. But what I'm questioning is that we weren't told about what these soils, you know, these bad soils were going to cost us at the time that we took the site work. And then they put in the building and finishes price the soils, okay? And from the specifications and from the preliminary soil borings and everything else, one could have easily projected what was going to happen in that situation. And my contention is that should have been in the price to begin with. It shouldn't have been excluded. Exclusions like that shouldn't happen. And that just is a way to make something look arbitrarily low and then come back after the fact. And that's what I'm trying to say.
I need to add some clarifications.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Number one, the early site encompassed all of the soil plasticities issues to date. That GMP covered it, and we still have a $14,000 balance. All I did was clarify that the allowance in the GMP was not $175,000, it was $170,000, and we have not spent one dime of that to date.
Well, it says in here that and I've got your bid says that you excluded that from the bid.
I did, because it would be fiscally irresponsible for me to put in the specs for Kugler Construction to assume how much bad dirt they're going to hit.
Well, I mean,
it doesn't make any sense.
But we weren't told that. We're a board.
Absolutely were told
We
it.
were never told that.
Absolutely. It was
No, we weren't either.
It was on my original presentation in executive session.
It
was a line item.
It's a line item that you excluded, but you haven't told us what it was going to cost.
If you'll ask-
And that's the point.
If you ask
I mean,
a
you know,
question so I
we
can answer.
are
My
paying
point
for
is
this.
it didn't cost you a dime
Well, it might not have, but how do we know that?
because it was covered in the early site work GMP. The only reason we put an extra allowance in there for the building package is because we thought we might have issues with the building pad itself under the building and in the footings with the plasticity. The early site GMP absolutely covered every cent of the bad soils,
I
and
have
it
it,
is
and
still under budget.
It's excluded. But anyway, Bobby, I got one other question for you here. Okay, when you're working on storm drainage and it's got Class A or Class 1 fill material, okay, and I'm talking about select fill material, and then a contractor goes in and uses Class 4 fill material instead of Class 1, and then depends on soil cement stabilization to take care of that problem later. What would have happened if we don't do soil cement stabilization in that regard? Would there possibly be a failure?
A reduced service life might be possible.
Right, and that's the point I was trying to make, is that you know, I'm a construction person. I've been doing this for 45 years. I'm not a tax lawyer that doesn't know anything about this. Okay, so I get a chance to look at things. I've been excluded from going on the site because of some reason I can't understand. I'm sitting in an owner's position, and I want to help. I wanted to be part of it. I was writing this. I wrote this as exactly what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to tell our superintendent that I knew of things that might not be right. And there's nothing wrong with me doing that. There's absolutely no reason for me to be scapegoated in here for that. But my point is that I know that if you don't use improper techniques, if improper techniques happen and tests aren't called for, it's not your fault that somebody didn't call you. Okay, when they put the curb and gutter material in, they poured 550 yards of curb and gutter material, never tested it once. I understand that.
We have tested it.
Well, I mean, it might have after the fact, but you didn't test it at the time it was installed.
We have now
Well,
tested.
yeah, I know you have now, but that's not the point. If you never called Mr., Bobby McLeod, he wouldn't know to test that. And I'm not saying that the SC50T, they specified a 3,000 material, and it says in there that's a structural mix, and you're supposed to test it according to SC50T. Okay, that's the way it's supposed to be done. And if the material was on site longer than it should have been, and all of those things that are in the South Carolina Department Manual are not followed, then I don't see why we as owners should not question that. And there's nothing wrong with me questioning that. And I don't understand this, why anybody's so puffed up about me asking questions.
Mr. Lovelace, I
it's
want to
not-
ask that we allow other board members to ask questions. I certainly will come back to you.
Well, and one clarification, those kind of issues are not uncommon, and I don't take offense to them. I mean, you got 55 instances with delivery tickets of overwater and, time and all that. There's 55 discrepancies on your truckloads.
Right.
So it's a common thing. It happens.
I didn't condemn anything. I
Okay?
just asked
But it
the
sounds
question.
like that you're making it out to be more than it is, because it happens. I mean, you're doing a great job at SLED, no doubt about it.
All I'm asking, Greg, is this, okay? What I'm asking is that we be told that kind of thing. Nobody says you're doing a bad job out there. That's not the point of this. The point is that we've had some pretty bad experiences here.
I understand.
In the past, and you're not the contractor there. You weren't the one that caused that. I understand that, but the people expect somebody to go look at what's going on and to be part of it. I'm not trying to, to make you out to be,
I
something.
appreciate you clarifying that.
I'm not. I mean,
All right,
it's just
Mr. Lovelace,
clear
I'm
as
going to
that.
ask, Mr. Lovelace, I will come back to you. Ms. Hutchison.
Thank you. This is not my question, but I do remember, Mr. Hughes, that we talked about that soil and requiring Kugler to be responsible for it. And you said that it was unfair. This was executive session. And, I think Mr. Lovelace, that Mr. Hughes even asked, would you take on that responsibility? So that was my recollection of hearing it. But my question, Mr. Lovelace just mentioned the...
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
Certainly. Mr. Lovelace just mentioned the concrete tickets. And it reminds me of an email that we all received from him on July the 16th, 2020, that disturbed me when I read, and I will read what he wrote, because I thought this sounds really odd. It said, a package of concrete delivery tickets came anonymously in the mail. I have reviewed those and found a serious problem, et cetera, et cetera. And my first thought is, why would someone send Mr. Lovelace these delivery tickets, and why would it be anonymous? So, Mr. Lovelace, I just wanted to ask, did I read this correctly? You received a packet?
That's right.
And it anonymous? I mean, why do you think, why would they send that?
Well, obviously somebody was worried about the quality, out there on the job. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know where it came from. But they are those tickets for that job, and and I'm very adept at looking at those. I mean, just like all. So I brought it to you guys' attention, and I sent it to the superintendent, and I did what I was supposed to do. I didn't go out there and do anything else after that. Not one thing did I do.
Okay, like I said, it was an unusual circumstance, but and we really haven't talked about this elementary 13 since I received it, and I did want to ask Mr. Hughes. I know that there have been several emails, follow-up questions, and lengths of questions that just go on and on about this concrete. Have you had to do extra testing of this concrete? And that you wouldn't normally do, based on the fact that it's, I believe it's curbing and it houses the electrical, I guess the feed for the school. Have you done extra testing?
We have done extra testing because there were concerns over the concrete, but I too was taken aback by an anonymous delivery of our concrete tickets, basically our subcontractors' concrete tickets, and they were solicited from Pete Knight, and he was asked to mail them, not email them.
They were.
Brian Scheffler with Knight's Ready Mix is here tonight. I'm going to ask him to come up and speak to the testing of concrete, curb and gutter, the water, the items that were commented on the delivery tickets that were solicited from Knight's. And Brian is the quality control director of Knight's Ready Mix. But to answer your question, again, Bruce Todd has already commented that concrete, curb and gutter on site is rarely, if ever, tested. I think Bobby would even say the same thing with Terracon, that concrete, curb and gutter is rarely, if ever, tested. Electrical, underground conduit, and encasement concrete is never tested, ever. It is an identifiable concrete, and there is no sense whatsoever to go to the expense to test it. But we did, because it was being questioned as far as the hundreds of gallons of water that were poured into that ditch.
I have a question about that.
Okay, I was just going to give you the test results.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so we took 20 cores, 3 of which were in the electrical conduit encasement, 17 of which were in the curb and gutter. Of the 20 cores, the 17 broke at 4478 for a 3,000 PSI specification on the curb and gutter. So 1,400 PSI, pounds per square inch, over the specified required strength. The electrical encasement, which is usually assumed to be a 2,000 to 3,000 mix, averaged 3,780. And then we went one step further, and took 8 what we call rebound hammer tests on the concrete, curb and gutter in various other locations. Those averaged 4,686 for a 3,000 mix. So the 2 different testing requirements by or testing methods by 2 different companies averaged within 100 PSI of each other. So their accuracy is probably beyond reproach. So yes, we did feel the need, since there was a question on water being added, truck times, we felt the need to test it in place so the district knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the concrete in place exceeded the specification requirements, because we don't want there ever to be a doubt that you're getting substandard work on this project.
And this is what would you estimate the expense for this extra testing that was not planned?
That, as well as investigating other things, $20,000 to $25,000 probably.
That, will that come out of our contingency? That will be determined?
Well, it'll be determined, and actually, Knight's Ready Mix did the right thing. They said, we knew we could stand behind this concrete since day one, and we're paying for the testing of this curb and gutter to prove that our concrete exceeds the specifications.
Right.
As far as billings, there are other contractual relationships outside of mine, so I don't know, but that's just an estimation based on time spent.
Okay.
On various
I know you
issues.
asked this
So you-
gentleman to come up, and I'll give you that
I think he's
opportunity.
got another question.
I'll come back to you. Are there anyone that is not? Mr. White, I'll come back to you. Ms. Hammond?
I appreciate all of you guys being here and staying so long with all we had going on, but I really don't have a question as much as I would like to say what it appears that Mr., and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like, number one, I'm glad to hear Mr. Lovely say it's not a question of the integrity of your work.
Appreciate that as well.
And we do have faith in that. But we've been burned in District 5.
Yes, ma'am.
And I've shared that with you and your other business associates. We've had some procurement problems. We have had, to me, I'm a teacher. Everything for me is every dollar saved goes back in the classroom. And I just know how badly we were burned on some issues that we still don't have resolved at Chapin High, some of the things that we paid for. But what I want to say is I appreciate your work, but I also feel like I hear Mr. Lovelace saying that we as a board, and I feel really badly that you guys are in the middle of it, but I feel like as a board, you know, he has felt that he hasn't been appreciated with his expertise. And just like I'm a teacher, Mr. White's a lawyer, Ms. Hutchinson is a PR person. Education, but, okay,
Yeah.
not a teacher, right? You don't have a teaching
Well,
degree.
I did teach some.
Did you have a
I
teaching
don't-
degree? Okay.
Can we
It's,
move-
it's different
move
at the
forward?
university
Okay,
level, Ms.
okay.
Hammond.
And-
Yeah, I get it. So what I think the board, and I think this is important to say, Mr. Cates, whether it be Mr. White's legal ideas, I know he's not our lawyer, but he certainly brings in his expertise. You know, every board member has something they bring. And that's what I think with construction. Why shouldn't we listen to Mr. Lovelace if that's what he knows something about? And I don't think he should go out and run anything. Nobody's saying that, but he certainly should be listened to by the chair and by the administration and answer his questions. That's all I really want to say. I want to say that I know what a good job Mr. Quackenbush does. He's an Irmo High graduate. This is so not that. And don't let any person on this board try to put it that we don't think you guys are doing a good job.
Well,
I just think he's
we're gonna-
asking the right questions to save any dollar
And I don't
that goes in
have
my
any,
classrooms.
I don't have any problem with the questions.
Thank you.
And we're gonna give you the best facility
I knew you.
you've had, and it will be under budget. And I do wanna speak to Mr. Lovelace's abilities as a contractor. He is doing a fantastic job on the project we're working together on. He was selected for his qualifications and doing a fantastic job. And there's similar type issues out there, but they're minor in the scheme of things, and we're pleased with what he's doing for us.
Mr. Hughes, or it could be Mr. Quackenbush or Mr. Neal. There's been a lot of question about the concrete. You received an email, or excuse me, you received Mr. Lovelace's letter and attachments, and you've since received 2 emails that Mr. Lovelace sent. Those were, I believe, forwarded to you through the superintendent and through Mr. Neal. Of all the issues raised in that letter and 2 emails, were there any of those issues that were substantiated? Were there any issues that he raised that caused you concern and you had to correct course? And this is for any of the 3 of you, because each of you are coming in at a different place.
Yeah, none whatsoever. In every single case, every designer, engineer, inspector agreed that all the installations were done in accordance with the project documents.
And then in one email, he spoke that the project quality control manager may also serve as project superintendent. There's a built-in conflict of interest. The fox is guarding the hen house.
So this
Can
one,
you speak
this,
to
this
that?
one hit hard because, as you well know, good superintendents are hard to come by. I think on June 18th, you were fairly impressed with Ryan Draft's.
I was. My question is
No,
not,
sir,
not
no, sir.
from you, but
Mr.
from-
Lovelace.
but from,
Mr. Lovelace.
yes, sir.
I
And
asked
my
Mr.
question
Mr.
is,
Lovelace.
my question is for you.
You do not have the floor. I've asked Mr. Hughes a question, and I'll allow him to answer it,
I think I know
please.
what he's wanting to ask. Quality control is something we have improved on over the last decade. And we have hired Delisa Clark, who was a 10-year former director of the Office of School Facilities. She trains fire marshals in the state of South Carolina. She's the chairperson of the South Carolina Codes Council. She goes to that project twice a week. She trains Ryan up and tells him what to look for, and he follows through. He reports daily to her. Jenny Rooney, a 15-year inspector for the Office of School Facilities, on staff full-time. She goes out there days Delisa doesn't go out there. So to say that Ryan's out there on an island by himself trying to do all the quality control is not the case. We have the most robust quality control program in this state when it comes to building schools. Ryan's attention to detail and his quality assurance is very clear in the fact that at 50% complete on a $26 million contract, he has no open deficiencies and only 30 noted. So I believe that Ryan Drafts can, in fact, supervise that project and make sure the quality is still there and keep it on schedule.
Mr. Quackenbush, were there any open issues from the letter or the 2 emails that needed your attention or that had to be corrected or changed the course direction for you?
No course correction. We simply answered the question in sufficient detail, so we're satisfied.
And then my last question, and I'll move on, is you said that we heard about these delivery tickets. Ms. Hutchison asked about them, and you said they were solicited. How were they solicited? Did it concern you that
Mr.
that
Lovelace
work
called
product?
Pete Knight and asked him to mail them to him.
So Mr. Knight provided those directly?
He did.
Right. Thank you.
Can you repeat that, please? Would you say?
Mr. Lovelace called Pete Knight and asked him to mail him the delivery tickets.
Are you Mr. Knight?
No, he's
I didn't-
representing
I didn't.
Mr. Knight.
That's
Oh.
not Mr. Knight. I've never met that man, so.
No, I'm sorry, that's Brian
Okay,
Scheffler.
that was my mistake,
I-
sorry.
Because the delivery tickets are in question, and there were discrepancies on the delivery tickets, which we acknowledge, I would like Brian Scheffler to talk a little bit about those discrepancies and what they mean to the overall quality. So if you would, Brian, and make sure you introduce your background.
Thank you. Brian Scheffler. I'm Vice President of Technical Sales at Knight's Ready Mix. I have a certification from the National Ready Mix Concrete Association as a certified concrete technician, and I serve on the ASTM Committee CO9, which oversees all the standards for ready mix concrete, and I also serve on the National Ready Mix Research and Engineering Committee that also reviews specification requirements. One of the concerns that is on the table is the fact that the age of the concrete is in question, or the 90-minute delivery time has been going over. The ASTM CO9 committee is reviewing that and recommending that change, the 90-minute rule change and be extended. In our mix designs that were supplied for the curb and gutter on this project, we use not only a retarding admixture, but a hydration stabilizing admixture. A hydration stabilizing admixture stops the hydration of cement for a period of time, depending on the amount that we put in. In this case, it was about a 2-hour delay, and so the concrete, after it was batched, was not hydrating, was not aging at all until that 2-hour time frame when the hydration stabilizer wears off. At that point in time, the concrete behaves like it was just freshly produced. So you may say that the 90-minute time frame was gone past, but the concrete was actually fresh at that point in time. And so the compressive strengths that were reported from the concrete in place verify that it wasn't over age or it didn't hydrate correctly.
Thank you. Mr. White.
Did I just hear Mr. Lovelace say he had no idea how these tickets arrived in his mailbox? And then Mr. Hughes say that he had called the company and asked for the tickets to be sent to him? Is that correct? So somebody's not telling the truth.
Brian, you can read your letter from Pete Knight if you'd like.
Yep. What we've provided Greg is that on or around April 17th, Mr. Lovelace requested copies of concrete delivery tickets as it pertains to curb and gutter concrete supplied to Kugler Concrete for the above referenced project. At Mr. Lovelace's request, the delivery tickets were mailed to his attention.
All right, Mr. White.
Just a couple of quick questions. The number two, I think I also heard there was nothing in Mr. Levis's letters that, and Greg, no offense, but assuming you might be a fox in a hen house, that our experts had already not detected, if there was something, you know, because I read the letter, the soil remediation. I do have a question for Michael Montgomery, and I can come back, but you know, I see on the face of the letter, and I also want to say for the public, anybody that's listening to this, the response from contract construction, item 9 talks about the soil remediation. That's something Mr. Hughes said earlier, that none of that money was spent, and I'll come back later to Mike Montgomery because we had discussions in the contract stages. But in terms of, and like in number 9, they're saying that Terracon notified the team something had to be done on October 4th. And then y'all had, you know, 7 different experts come in here and design the solution, and we didn't pay a penny more for it. But my question is, that's an instance where something had already been detected, corrected, and fixed before Mr. Levis even wrote his letter. But is there anything in his letter that had already not been detected by our people that are reviewing this work?
Mr. White, I don't know of anything. We also consulted, based on his letter, we consulted the electrical and civil engineers of record, and they reported no concerns on their part with anything relating to them in the letter.
And this conduit concrete, like I've got a picture here that, and it was something that Mr. Levis wanted us to look at, and he was critical of me putting my letter on the record because I didn't include all the attachments. So this attachment was asked for over and over, and I've got this attachment, and I think this is conduit concrete, but it's a picture of a trench with conduit laid out as if maybe wires are going to go through there and maybe concrete. And the inspection report says deficiencies found, no. And it goes on, installation of Schedule 40 conduits are installed in accordance with plans. Is this one of these things where you're going to have the concrete poured in here on top of the conduit?
Yes, and Doug, if you'd allow, I'd like for Chris Patrick to speak to these installations.
So, yeah, Chris, why don't you provide a little more specificity on the issue?
And what's
please?
the purpose of the concrete on the conduit?
It's an identifying device. If 5 years from now someone's putting in a new irrigation line and digging through the yard with a backhoe, they hit the concrete and they stop.
Before they hit the
They know
cables.
they're getting ready to hit some high voltage.
Yes, there's no structural value to that concrete. It's just there and it's not a requirement by code. It's something we do above and beyond the code. So if someone's digging, they'll hit concrete first. It lets them know, hey, stop digging. There's something down there, and that's it. And so I've been doing this 30 years. We've never required testing for that specific concrete.
So these were all done correctly?
Correct.
I mean,
Yes.
is there something I'm missing on this one? Because I keep looking at it saying, well, it should be a deficiency noted, and they said no deficiencies found. I mean,
Right.
and I'll keep looking for the revelation here. Am I missing something? I mean, because you're basically saying this is an extra sort of precaution.
It's
just
an
to put
extra safety
concrete on
precaution.
top so nobody can dig
Correct.
into the cables.
All right. Mr. Gant?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cates. I want to make sure, I want to go back. Not sure if Mr. Hughes is probably the right person, but I think so. Give me the trail, if you will, of the concrete tickets that I think I heard showed up at Mr. Lovelace's house anonymously, but I'm hearing that it was not anonymous. That's what was reported to the board. Will you kind of trail that? Do we know how those tickets got to Mr. Lovelace? And was it an anonymous delivery from somewhere in a mystery novel? What's going on with that?
I mean, just to reiterate, Mr. Lovelace called Pete Knight to request the delivery tickets, basically stating that he was on the board and just wanted to check into things, which same thing I did with Concrete Supply, on SLED, and got his delivery ticket. So, it was nothing, Pete Knight wasn't doing anything wrong, but he supplied the delivery tickets and mailed them to his office, and then Mr. Lovelace was able to look at water hydration issues and truck time issues, which are obviously very common in the concrete industry.
Right. Would it have been a normal request, somebody in construction with a connection to have asked for that same thing and so then be delivered? I don't know why the anonymous part got in our email. And,
I can't speak to that, but you know, there was a concern there, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it, and he reviewed the tickets, and we have addressed all the concerns to everyone's satisfaction on the design team.
Okay. So, and that helps me out. That is a little bit of revelation. I tell you, from the beginning of this, Mr. Lovelace reported he had a neighbor and a good friend that I know also, most of us do. She's a talented musician, but on a Friday night about dark or dusk, she rides by the site on Amy's Ferry Road and reports problems going on at the site. Now, I don't know of any training she had, any area related to concrete, maybe she does. But to ride by the site at 30, 35 miles an hour and then report issues and problems, and then they have these mysterious concrete tickets. I find that very troubling. You said a little while ago, Mr. Hughes, that inspections took place, you all went back after the fact, when in fact everything was in order, but $25,000 cost to that. And that will be worked out among the contractors, I'm sure, and yourself.
Yeah, I don't want to mislead giving the impression just those tests were $35,000, just the issues that we followed up on. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But to me, I think that points in the direction of why we don't have board members, any board members, other than arranged visit on a job site, possibly directing people when we have no authority to do that. And you have quite an inspection team set up with Terracom, the other inspectors. I'm quite confident. I hope Mr. Lovelace is more confident as well. But I will tell you this, it troubles me. Know those tickets were reported to this board, fellow board members, as delivered anonymously. And then there's money spent, could cost us more money in the long run because of that kind of issue. I'll leave it with that. I don't know if anything else to say. Just a little bit astounded at what I'm hearing.
Mr.
I think Mr. Lovelace, and then I'll come to you.
Okay, when you, on the duck bank issue, I poured probably 5 miles of duck bank at Fort Jackson, and every test, every piece of it, every yard was tested, okay? And we have, that duck bank goes under roadways also, am I correct?
We need to clarify what it actually is.
And I've designed, at the village at Sandhill, we did that job. We designed a traditional duck bank, and it was structural and had testing required. Of course, I will say they took it all out because of the price.
Yeah.
On this case, this was not a traditional duck bank. This was just putting some concrete on top of Mid-Carolina's conduit as an extra precaution to warn someone from digging. It was not a traditional duck bank. Duck bank's not in the code. A duct is underground conduit. Duck bank's an industry term to describe when you bank a bunch of conduit and space them and have a nice big bank, and it'll run, if you have a multi-campus building, Fort Jackson's a good example.
Yeah.
For just running your primary out to the road, that's not a traditional duck bank, and it's not an industry standard to require testing on that.
But this did go under roadways, right?
Yes, and it's not, the concrete, in our spec, the concrete is not required when it goes under the roadway because the asphalt protects it. Same if it's under the building slab or under a parking lot.
Yeah, that has to do with the coverage that's
Correct.
required over the, okay, but in the pictures I saw, the conduit was held down to keep it from rolling by dirt. There was dirt piled on top of it at intervals, probably about 50 feet. pictures in test report number 37. Is that standard process to put dirt down to hold a conduit and then pour concrete on top of dirt?
They would want to remove the dirt to pour the concrete.
Yeah, okay. And you say there's no structural value to the duck bank, but, you
And
know, under a roadway, there's no structural value to it at all. It doesn't need to be, you know, it doesn't need to be tested.
There was no concrete required under the roadway.
Okay. All right. And the, Mr. Hughes, the quality control manager that we were talking about, okay, is there a reason why the quality control managers should not have been? I mean, is that something that the district requested you do to save money? Why would we not have two employees for that, two different functions? Because one, the superintendent's pushing schedule. He's pushing to get the thing done. Okay, there's reports in your test reports, I've read them all, in there where your man didn't even know, Mr. Ryan didn't even know that there were problems that Bobby McLeod's people were reporting from subcontractors. For example, out on the transformer pad.
Yeah.
Okay, they shipped in concrete from another supplier, didn't have a design mix, and they cited that the material had been on the site for too long. And that was, Mr. McLeod put a red deficiency on the top of his report.
And Mr. McLeod was incorrect in the deficiency because he noted that it did not meet the strength of a 4,000 mix, when in fact on E609, as well as Mid-Carolina's design of the transformer pad, it requires 3,000 PSI concrete. West Electric chose to deliver 4,000 to ensure that it broke well over 3 before the transformer got there, and it did in fact break 3810.
But the point is not whether the thing tested out at certain PSI. It's whether the concrete was placed after it started to set in the truck. For example, on the things on the curb and gutter here, you've got places where you retempered the concrete 4 times. And your expert is wrong, because this concrete goes under the SCDOT spec. It's not 90 minutes, it's 120 minutes. But even at that, even at 120 minutes, you went over by 100 minutes on some of these things.
And even with all that, it broke 1,500 PSI over design strength.
But even, I'm not worried about the PSI. What I'm worried about is the strength, is the concrete. You can have concrete that tests early strength that isn't quality concrete.
So what is the concern on the curb?
Well,
what is the actual concern?
I'm worried
what
about
do you think's going to happen?
Well, I'm worried about spalling. I'm worried about it not staying there for, you know, and I know what you're going to say next is that you're willing to pay for it. But,
absolutely.
You know, there's not, and I don't doubt that. But the point that I'm making is that there were things wrong with this. And, there, you know, I got every right in the world to say, I'm being chastised here for getting some concrete tickets, but you did the very same thing to me. You went to Concrete Supply and told them to send my concrete tickets to you.
I did.
And didn't tell me.
Exactly.
I mean, the same thing, but I didn't, what did I tell them? I told them to be, you know, when I found out about it 2 weeks later, I told them to go ahead, no problem. I don't have a thing to hide.
And we don't have an issue with anything we found.
We don't have a thing to hide. But with this group, I'm not even allowed to look at the concrete tickets. Now, why would that be? Why would this group of people not want me to see the data that was behind this?
It's not for me to say.
I know. And that's the point. They're trying to scapegoat me for trying to do the people's business and to make this right. I was looking, trying to make a better project. And I don't see that what I've done is anything but that. And I've got every right in the world to ask whether a conduit ought to be Schedule 80 or Schedule 40, with the conditions that it was in. I know those things. I put in 20 miles probably at Michelin and places like that. I've done a lot of that kind of work. So there's nothing wrong.
All we're asking is to listen to the designers.
That's fine, but I didn't ask you to go out there and run up a $35,000 testing bill. Nobody asked you to do that. And that's not fair for me to be chastised for something that I didn't even know was being done. You know, that's a you know, they're always talking about in here, that's a gotcha. Okay? And I was looking to make sure that we had quality control on our job. And I still don't understand why we don't have two people doing, you know, one to do quality control. Now, I noticed that your project manager, Jim Mott, was doing quality control after a while, right? He was involved.
We all
in that.
do.
He was involved in that.
I do it every time I'm out there. Delisa does it every time she's out there. Jenny does it every time she's out there. Ryan does it every day he's out there.
And by the way, when
Charlie, Ryan's assistant superintendent, does it every day
and
he's
by
out
the
there.
way, when I was on the job site, just that one time I've been on the job site for us to be out there, I talked to Ryan. I pointed out to him 3 things to do with masonry because I know masonry. Used to be a masonry contractor. I pointed out 3 things to him that would make the project better. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with having a teamwork approach. I didn't tell him to do something. I just said, have you thought about this? Because I've got 45 years experience doing this.
And he listens.
He does, and he's a great kid, and he's smart, and I don't have a problem with that, and I don't think he had a problem with me pointing it out.
Not at all.
So, you know, that's what I'm saying to this group is that it takes a team approach. Now, if you've run up a big bill on that, I'm sorry, but you know, I don't think that would have cost that much to do some cores. I really don't.
No, I did clarify it wasn't just the core testing.
I mean, what does a core cost?
Yeah,
$250?
and Knights Ready Mix paid for that.
Yeah.
Because
Mr.
they
Hughes.
wanted to prove their concrete was good. Yes, I'm sorry.
Mr. Hughes, Mr. Lovelace said that your expert was wrong. I guess you're speaking of the gentleman that just spoke about the concrete. Is he still?
He is. Brian's still here.
That's why we that's why we ask these folks to come, so when those statements are made, they can be clarified and corrected if need be.
He's correct in the sense that the South Carolina DOT requirement, if you're using a retarding admixture, allows you to extend to 120 minutes instead of 90. Okay, we had retarding admixture in our mix design, and I described that we were also using a hydration stabilizer that had a 2-hour hydration stabilization period to it. So that period, that 2-hour period, the concrete was not hydrating, and so when that wears off, it starts to hydrate, and then the clock starts to tick on the hydration. So that concrete behaves like it's fresh after that hydration period. So he's correct in that if you're using a retarding admixture on South Carolina DOT work, you're allowed to go to 120 minutes delivery time.
So yes, I hear you say yes, that's correct, but what you're saying is the concrete, based on the way that it was worked, based on this retarding agent, it met the specification.
That's correct.
Thank you. And then, you know, the statement was that there was no ask for any of this response, but when a sitting board member raises concerns, it's the superintendent and the administration must take those serious. So yes, obviously, raised questions are going to be investigated and answered, and that is indeed what you've done. Mr. Hughes, you've done a lot of school projects. Mr. Quackenbush, Mr. Farley, I see you've made your way from the corner up to the. Oh, okay. Is it common for board members to come on the job site just kind of at their own, at will?
No, it's usually a structured tour.
So it's
various integrals of the project.
It's a coordinated visit.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Cates, may I add something?
Yeah, Mr. Neal.
I was on the Richland 2 School Board, as you know. I never once, and I think Mr. Hughes and Mr. Farley can attest to this, I never once went to any project site without being invited by the folks in the administration construction office, because I didn't see that as my function, despite that I have over 40 years of experience in the business. My function was to be a board member.
Ms. Hutchison, I believe you had a question.
Yes. I know that we had a letter from Mr. Knight. I'm sorry, I missed the gentleman. And I was wondering if that is a duplicate, if I could get a copy of that so that I could attach it to the minutes of this meeting.
Well, we got a bunch of letters.
So you
Yeah, we
have
can
them,
do that.
thank you.
That's fine.
And any
Okay.
documents you have in support of your answers to these questions, I'd appreciate copies.
Well,
of-
and, you know, I think it's important for that letter from Mr. Knight to go along, and I'm gonna put on the minutes the July 16, 2020 email from Mr. Lovelace, where he claims that he got it anonymously. You know, Mr. Lovelace, you could have just said you called and asked them for it. I mean, that was not necessarily what a school board, that's not what a school board member needs to do, but I think being truthful, instead of saying it's anonymous, would be preferable. I also did not want to, we got mired down into all this concrete, but, you know, there are more issues. And one of the issues that I felt like we just skipped across, which is kind of surprising to me when Mr. Hughes, you said that Mr. Lovelace Construction Company has a $1.25 million contract with you. Is that correct?
Somewhere in that range, a little over
Okay.
1.2.
And what I understand is it was bid as a sitting board member.
Assume
Well,
so.
he
I
was
don't-
elected in November 2018. And so I'm going to attach on the record from the South Carolina State Ethics Commission advisory opinions where they write that no public official, public member, or public employee may knowingly use his official office, membership, or employment to obtain an economic interest for himself, a member of his immediate family, an individual with whom he is associated, or a business with which he is associated. So, and this really is not pertaining to you, Mr. Hughes. I see you're trying to figure out the answer. But what I'm saying is, because Mr. Lovelace put a bid in as a sitting school board member, and he received the bid for $1.25 million, then, you know, according to the South Carolina State Ethics Commission, this is an ethics violation. Maybe it's not a violation, but I do think it's well, they say it's a violation, but I do think it's a problem. I think it's an ethical problem. And when, you know, some of us are accused by Mr. Lovelace for going to a working dinner at a conference with your construction company and getting a $50 meal, I find the hypocrisy of a $1.25 million contract compared to a $50 meal that we estimate is $50, where it's a working dinner where all the school board members are invited, and as well as the vendors. So it is a working dinner. I'm not going back to my room and propping my feet up. So I just wanted to make that very clear, and I will attach this, Mr. Cates, to the minutes, this ethics, and I will appreciate getting a copy of that letter from Mr. Knight that I will also attach to the minutes.
Yes, ma'am.
Other questions?
Yes.
Mr. Lovelace?
Okay. Now, as far as that thing, that diatribe, did I ever contact you or talk to you
No,
or
sir.
do anything about the job at SLED?
No, sir.
Did Ken Lovelace ever use his influence with you? Did he ever ask you anything about the job at SLED?
No, sir.
Fact is, we've never talked about that, have we?
Only on June 18th.
We saw, when you were on the job site out there, I said I was going to come by the job site and see you,
And I
right?
told you were doing a good job.
And that's the only time we've ever talked about that.
That's correct.
So if somebody sit here and tell me that I got to go out of business because I'm on the school board, because I know Greg Hughes, because I bid a job, I mean, that's ridiculous. That is so far-fetched.
We want you to keep doing work for us.
Well, I mean, would you not want me to do work with
No,
you?
that's why I said you do good work.
Did it have anything to do with the school district? No, none of that did. Absolutely not one thing to do with the school district. In fact is, I didn't bid the job. Trey McDaniel did, right?
That's correct.
Okay, Trey McDaniel negotiated that with you. I don't know anything about the job. I haven't even been there. Okay, so another thing that we discussed, is your concrete man still over there?
Yeah, he is.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Now, there's 24 tickets on this thing that I reviewed that didn't have retarder in it. And all of those went way past the time. Now, how do you know, they didn't put retarder in there for the first 12 tickets, and then later on down the line, they didn't do that. They didn't use a retarding admixture. And those were 75 minutes according to this SCDOT, right? It says you have to.
It depends on the temperature, but that mixed design throughout the project had a hydration stabilizer in it.
Well, it didn't, because you didn't have it in there.
Right, it's not on a delivery ticket because it's in the mixed design. If a retarder is asked for, it becomes a separate line item. That's an additional cost.
That's what I'm saying, and it's an additional cost for that, isn't there? For the
Yes,
retarder.
For the retarder, mhm.
Yeah.
But there was
But
no
it's-
additional cost for the hydration stabilizer.
Chemical companies don't give it away for free, do they? So there were a bunch of concrete, there was a bunch of concrete put in there that was over the time limit, even, because you didn't have retarder, okay? But I just
want to make sure, is that a question or a statement?
Well,
Did he answer
well,
that?
I'll make a question out of it then. If there were 24 tickets on here that didn't have retarder in it that went over 75 minutes, then that was not per spec, right?
The mixed design had a hydration stabilizer in it, which would allow for an extended delivery. Just because it has a retarder in it, and this is concrete placed in colder weather, the normal time frame is 90 minutes.
The normal time frame is not 90 minutes. That's ACI, and that's not SCDOT. But anyway, I mean, I don't want to argue about the nitpicking there.
I don't know that this was SCDOT concrete.
It was.
Okay.
I mean, it's specified in there as SCDOT concrete, and that's the reason why they were using that design mix. But anyway, is Mr. McLeod still out there? Would you come back up here, please? I want to ask you a question. All right, the preliminary soil borings call for a test for every 8-inch lift under the building at 2,500 square feet, and then anywhere that was fill area at 1 per 10,000 square feet of 8 inches. All right, I did a rough takeoff on it, just roughly, and it looked like to me that there should have been like 220 tests out there, and I realized that some of it may have been cut, and you didn't need to test it and cut like that. I realized, so I factored that in like half or something. But anyway, I could only find 11 tests that were actually done on the bulk fill. Most of those tests were done in the storm drainage areas. So it was off by an order of magnitude, and I told our superintendent that. Is there a reason why we wouldn't have tested according to what, I realize that you didn't do the preliminary soil report. I realize it was another company, but was that in error or something? Why they would recommend that and us not do that?
I don't think it was an error. It was a professional judgment. Our technicians were there essentially full-time, and if you come and go to run the test periodically, then that numerical and arithmetic frequency is necessary. If you're there all day, every day, and you see the same equipment and the same soil, then, in my opinion, it's okay if you run fewer tests because the tests that you have run confirm those methods.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm just asking you, would it be, would it, in your opinion, be out of line for an owner to ask you why we weren't doing the test according to what was in the preliminary soil board?
We work for the owner and we answer their questions.
I mean, why would that be something to, to worry about or not worry about? I realize y'all were out there and I trust you. I mean, you're doggone good at what you do. In fact, we've worked together many times, but anyway, what I'm saying to you is that why would it be out of the ordinary, or Mr. Hughes, why would it be out of the ordinary for somebody to ask you, those questions?
We're not saying it's out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I mean,
we responded,
And
hopefully
if
the
everything's
response was
perfectly
acceptable.
fine, and if you're willing to accept it, that's great. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with me the reason why I was asking, because we had on another project, we had some failures, and big-time failures. And it was in the storm drainage area, and it was in field conditions, and it was in clay soils, and it was all those things. And so I think it would be proper for somebody that knew what they were looking at, that nobody else on this board would, to ask that question. And that's the reason I wrote to ask. And it was simple. I mean, let's say that something was wrong, and we could catch it before we did the, something on top of it. Wouldn't have that been an imprudent thing to do?
That's what we try to do every day.
I mean, I thought it was working as a team, but I mean, maybe I'm just,
Well, it came across wrong.
yeah.
But
Well,
I appreciate
I'm
you
very sorry for
clarifying.
that, but I
Yeah.
mean,
Ms. Hutchinson.
I thought I was looking out for you guys too.
Thank you. I won't take but a minute. But, Mr. Lovelace, by no means am I saying that you need to go out of business. From what Mr. Hughes says, that you are very good at what you do. What I was saying is that is a conflict of interest. And even though you say that you and Mr. Hughes had no conversation, Mr. Hughes and Contract Construction Company were already under contract with this school district, had been for some time, building Piney Woods Elementary School. So that relationship was established, that knowledge. Now, I'm not saying, Mr. Hughes, please know, I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but I'm saying the appearances. And I will say to you, Mr. Lovelace, that there have been a lot of things that several of us on the board, I will say, that I have been accused of that are not true. And then especially like the mills or something else. That is nothing. The hypocrisy is unreal. So I just want to
I take offense to that. I have not been a hypocrite
well,
about this.
I think the fact that you have a $1.25 million contract.
I'm building a job for the state of South Carolina.
Well, you have it
with another contractor.
I have the floor, and
There's
you have
nothing wrong with me doing that.
I
That's
have the
absolutely
floor,
ridiculous.
Mr.
We're not going to do the
Lovelace.
crosstalk. Stop, please.
And I'm going to wrap this up, but I just want to say that the relationship was known, and a lot of times conversation goes on without even having communication. So it's the appearances, Mr. Lovelace,
no
that look
appearance
bad,
at all. I
and
didn't do
it's the
anything wrong.
ethics. So I will cede the floor.
Mr. White.
A couple of questions and then a couple of points. Mr. Montgomery, if I could ask you a question, because I know you were involved in the contract negotiation. I think it was not negotiation, it was the review before we signed the contract. And we met in executive session, and Mr. Lovelace had a number of concerns about the contract, and you were addressing those concerns and listening and advising the board as a whole as to whether or not those concerns had been addressed. And the soil issue or the subsurface conditions were a component of that conversation, and I think your advice to us at that time was to, and I want you to explain this if I don't say it correctly, but it was that the contract was commercially reasonable as you were delivering it to us, and to put a term that would would have increased their exposure and risk for the subsoil given that type of contract, would have made it a contract that a vendor would never sign based on your experience. And so when I look about the soil remediation, and they're saying, had we put them at risk, they would have substantially raised the price on us if they would have signed the contract at all, or maybe they wouldn't have signed it at that price. But it appears that with your advice, we proceeded with that contract in spite of Mr. Levis's objections, and now we're looking where it all turned out in the district's best interest. Is that, am I missing something? Was that the same issue?
Mr. White, I think that's a fair characterization. Just specifically, I mean, every contract is a balance between the two parties. And so if you ask someone to do more, it costs more. If you ask someone to undertake additional risk, then there's generally a price for that. I think Mr. Hughes made a comment when he was asked that it would have been unfeasible because of the cost. Essentially, prior to entering that contract, the district had engaged in due diligence before they purchased the site, which included soil testing. And so you had a good idea of the quality of the soils on the site, and also you had professionals who were engaged in construction in similar locations. So you had a good idea that there's a possibility of some subsurface soil condition, but it was in a manageable kind of criteria. And it's very simple. The way the contract is structured, the district undertook some risk, but it's proven to be an appropriate risk, and I think it would be an appropriate risk in any circumstances. The entire board discussed it. We discussed it with the consultant. We discussed it from a legal standpoint, the effect of the contract, and the conclusion was that was a prudent move to make. I think that, you know, we would love to all have a contract where we assigned all the responsibility to the other party.
Can you speak up just a little bit, please?
I'm sorry, I said we would all love to have a contract where you assigned all the risk to another party, but there is a cost to the assignment of risk in the construction industry. And so you have to make testing decisions, and you have to make decisions from a contract basis as to what the site is. If you ask a contractor, Mr. Hughes might comment, if you ask a contractor, or he had asked his subcontractor, Kugler, to be responsible for the entire gamut of potential soil conditions on the site, the price would have been considerably higher, I expect.
And he would have reaped all the benefit.
And there would have been no ability for the district to benefit from those soil conditions.
Yes. Kugler would have kept all the savings because he would have covered himself for sure.
So we turned it, in other words, your advice was good. We proceeded in spite of Mr. Lovis's objections to that provision in the contract, majority of the board, and we turned out with that soil was remediated at no additional cost to us, and we didn't give away extra profit to a third party. Is that a fair assessment?
Correct, and we've yet to spend one dime of the allowance we put in for that soil. Understand that all of the remediation was covered through the contingency in the early site GMP. None of the $170,000 allowance for unsuitable soils has been spent, not 1 cent.
And I think the other thing, Mr. Montgomery, you may want to get a little bit closer to the microphone because I've actually got somebody that texted me and said they can't hear you. People are listening to this meeting. It's process, and this all highlights process. And I think, Dan, you've been on a school board, you're a professional engineer, and I'm going to read a statement that I think is a theme here we've been dealing with, and it's from Mr. Lovelace to the board, and it says, and it's in an email, I'll put this on the record, dated February 13th, 2020. I was elected to bring oversight, so we will not have projects such as the Chapin High School renovations where the experts were aware that the work was not per specification and ended up costing the taxpayers millions to correct defects. So we're going to deal with the millions to correct defects in a later discussion, and I think you, Mike, you were signaling you want to roll that to the next meeting. But I was there, Mike Montgomery was there. This is not an accurate statement about the millions. We can save that for another night. And I've been requesting a lot of information so that we can put a record together because there's not a clear record. And I was involved in every settlement discussion as a board member, and Mike Montgomery was handling those. But the point about I was elected to bring oversight, and this is almost a rhetorical question, but is there any differentiation on school board seats? I mean, it's my understanding we all have the same rights and responsibilities, and if one board member says, I want to go walk that site and do this because of X, everybody else could request the same thing. And it's not a calibration of who's got the most skills. We all have the same rights and responsibilities. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, both under state law and under board policy, that each board member is elected to be a member of the board, not to carry out any specific task on behalf of the district. The board, its primary responsibility is to hire a superintendent and manage the superintendent. The superintendent, by law and by board policy, is responsible for the day-to-day operation of the district. The best analysis of that is on a corporate level. The board of directors does not run the company day-to-day. They hire a chief executive officer, which is what the superintendent is, and that person is tasked with the day-to-day operation of the enterprise. And the district school board model is very similar to the way a corporate model works, Mr. White.
And on that point, is that true? I mean, you sat and watched us listen to 2 hours of people telling us we're not doing our job. Is it our job to run this district during a COVID pandemic? Is that same analysis, the CEO, it's the CEO's job to run the district?
Mr. White, I can tell you, from my own personal experience, having served on a school board in this area for 8 years and been the chairman for several of those years, that the school board's obligation is to set policy and goals. What I heard from the board tonight was that you were asking that the superintendent take her best effort using her education and professional judgment and that of her staff to bring face-to-face instruction about at the earliest possible time. And I think that's an appropriate thing, but to give her a date probably exceeds what the legal authority of the board would be, because that's not the board's role. The board's role, from a standpoint of policy, is to set broad policies, to set policies as to how the district is governed and operated, to approve staff, to hire a superintendent, to approve and set an annual budget, and to do a number of other things that are set forth. But managing the day-to-day operation of the school's construction projects, those are outside the legal purview of what a school board member does. And the other thing that I would add is that the board can only operate as a body. It's no different than a member of the General Assembly or a United States Senator. You can go out and you can say what you want, but until that body has a legal vote after proper notice and takes action, there is no action taken. I hope that's answered your question.
As board members, we're not owners. We're not an owner in the construction sense.
No, sir, you're a trustee of the owner.
And
no different than if you're a member of the board of directors of AT&T or any other corporate entity. Your responsibility is to oversee what management is doing, but it's not to dictate what management does.
And I want to go real quick, I got two other points. I'm going to stop after this one and come back, but I do got two other points to make. But
Ms. Gardner has not had a chance to speak. Let me come to Ms.
go,
Gardner.
you go
and
ahead.
I'll come back to you.
With mine.
I would like to take exception to what we're talking about because we're supposed to be talking about construction, and we've circled back to reentry. And if we're going there, I can ask Mr. Montgomery these questions. So you're just completely ignoring the fact that the boards across the state have all voted on the reentry plans. And secondarily, that there are other parts of the policy, of our own policy, says that we oversee the superintendent. Like, we're supposed to just forget about that part so that we can affirm. And we know from past board meetings there's not good blood between us. So I appreciate what you've said to him, but I think it's not true because you're just upset with me, maybe. Or maybe you just, I'd like to hear you say that everybody else across the whole state did it wrong because they voted on their reentry plans.
Ms. Gardner, first of all, I can't comment on what everybody else across the state has done because I haven't been asked to ascertain that and look at it. But I can tell you that if the superintendent brought a plan and asked you to vote on it and approve it, that would be appropriate. but it would be appropriate for you to vote on the plan that she presented to you, and you can give it up or down. The superintendent asking a board to vote on a plan is different than the board instructing the superintendent what the plan is. And secondly, I'm not aware that I have any
We did not do
bad
that.
blood
We
with
asked for
you.
her to bring it to us. So you're mixing it up. I just want to clarify for
No,
everybody
ma'am,
that's
I don't
listening.
believe I'm mixing it up. I heard
think
the
you
motions
are.
here
The
this
motion
evening.
was that she needed to bring it to us so that we could see it and we could agree on it and talk about it and discuss it. And so we knew the science behind why they were doing it, and then maybe approve it, maybe not, whatever. But it was not, we did not request her that she had to bring it for direct, like she had to clear it with us first.
That wasn't the way I understood the motion,
Well,
Ms.
that's
Gardner.
not exactly what it was.
So
I want to come back to the topic at hand,
I'm just saying,
please.
we're changing the subject, and I would
Well,
prefer that we didn't.
It was an
the role of the board is tied because the question was raised about the role of the board. And just for clarity, not every district has voted on reentry.
Most have.
No, ma'am.
None
I
of
don't
them?
believe that is accurate. But anyhow, let's not, we'll
Well,
have to Google it.
I was going to say, I
yeah.
mean, we'll have to ask the boards across the state if they all have, but a lot of them have.
So do you have a construction related, if we'll come back.
Okay, but if we're going to start asking reentry questions, then I need to
We're
come back to
leaving
my
that
question.
topic.
Okay, we're leaving it, then I
We're
won't ask
we're not going to
anymore.
go back to
But
reentry.
as soon as Ed White goes back, I will raise my hand again.
I just said we're not going back to reentry. Mr. White, excuse me, let me come back down here. Mr. Lovelace.
Okay, a few minutes ago, we were talking about unclassified excavation. Okay, this district, the first night my wife was on the board, the first night, Mr. Gant, they voted, well, they didn't vote. They gave a $600,000 change order to Richardson Construction Company on the center over at for advanced technical. $600,000 and said they didn't have to vote on it because it was part of an allowance. And what caused that was that they had to take out soils that weren't, that weren't as they were supposed to be. So, you can roll that dice one way or the other. Okay, we all know that. We know there's a risk, and Mr. Montgomery wasn't there during that period of time, I don't believe, but he might have been, because that was 2012, and you didn't come on until 2013, so I think I'm right. But anyway, you roll that dice when you don't do that. And I realize that y'all made a decision, and you made a decision, and this time you were right. You've probably been involved in things like I have where you were not right too, haven't you?
Sometimes.
Okay, sometimes sometimes the fox eats you and sometimes you chase it, right? So anyway, the point is that my recommendation was to study that, to make sure that we didn't go down that road again, that we didn't spend a whole bunch of money on something that we didn't need to. The first subcontractor they used over there pulled off the job because he'd underbid it and didn't understand. And they had to go to the second bidder and then gave him a $600,000 extra for that.
Mr. Lovelace, can we
Okay,
tie
so,
this
so
to
well,
this?
this is what
Can
I'm
you
tying
tie
it to.
Yes, sir.
I am
I'm just-
tying it to it. That's exactly what I'm doing.
Well,
I'm
please do.
saying I'm asking you the question, sometimes isn't it prudent to use unclassified excavation?
I really don't think so, because very rarely is the subcontractor, because you know as well as I do, it's a pass along to the site subcontractor.
Right.
Okay? And that site subcontractor very rarely is going to lose in that bet.
Yeah.
Rarely.
I'll make one comment, Mr. Lovelace.
All right.
We've been in business 36 years. I realize we operate in a different realm of construction than you do. I've had one contract. It was unclassified excavation. And in the end, the owner had to pay for it anyhow because they deceptively, intentionally omitted some of the borings that showed a pile of debris. So there's no benefit to anybody to have an unclassified excavation clause in the contract that I am aware of and that I've ever been a party to.
I've had a different
So
experience,
I don't know,
I'm
I don't
sorry.
know why you keep harping on this when the fact has been established that it has not cost the district any more than I guaranteed maximum price on the site work alone.
Well, it did.
Nothing came from the building package to pay for unsuitable
Well,
soils.
it did in that
and
case. What I'm trying to say is, our attorney sat there and said that unclassified excavation is never a good idea. You said it just then. I've seen the opposite. I've seen where it was, and I saw it on the center project.
A good idea for the owner or for the subcontractor to reap the benefit?
No.
Or alternatively, the subcontractor that lost his shirt because of it.
Well, no,
You
I
got to
didn't.
look at it, as Mr. Montgomery said, from both sides, from both parties.
Well, I mean, I'm not harping on anything. I'm bringing up the fact that I'm defending what I recommended was that we look at unclassified excavation. And every piece of soil on that site out there was one that could possibly not have been used. Every bit of the soil's out there.
And you wanted to have $1 million extra in the site work package that the subcontractor would benefit
I didn't know that it was only going to cost $175,000 or whatever you put in there. You say you haven't used any of that allowance. I don't know that.
This is a pointless argument, and I'm going to withdraw from it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. White, please, rapidly. I'm ready to.
And I want to, no, but I mean, this
We'll be here all night.
issue with the relationship, I didn't make the school tour, but, you know, that was the official trip that I think any board member who wants to purview and review things would have the opportunity to do so. But did Mr. Lovelace say anything about the questions I'm asking you when you were on that walkthrough with him? Did he make any comments about the questions that we're asking him that we're here tonight talking about?
Nothing specifically. I think nothing specifically other than just he didn't want to see it go on and on and on. I said, I don't either.
And has he in any way, while he's serving this school board, talked to you about doing more work in his official capacity on that tour or any other time when he's serving?
I wouldn't call it an official capacity. Just after complimenting him on how good a job he does, he, looking to do more work.
So he asked you that when you were on the tour?
I believe it's after, as the tour concluded, just.
And I'll tell you, the thing, and I'm not even going to approach the ethics question here because I think, Ms. Lovelace, we had, a similar conversation recently about attorney's fees and people taking donations. And I can tell you, though, the things that I've seen, Mr. Lovelace, that you've written and the things you're saying about the people on this board, it's implying that when people that sit on this board take donations from vendors or accept meals at conferences, they are giving influence to these vendors. And it's actually not the process in construction because we have screening and scoring committees. But when I see a $1.2 million contract with potentially a $120,000 profit that a school board member has in hand, bidding on a contract with a vendor that we have a $30 million contract with, there's no question in my mind your status as a board member is a level of influence, and you've actually turned it around. You've been alleging that we, and everybody at this table has gone to a conference and had a dinner, but you're alleging that we gave influence to the vendors, and it appears to me that you're acquiring influence for you by your status and even these letters and putting them through, this kind of scrutiny when we have experts that can do this and do this all the time and who are responsible to us. And I see it, it's putting you in a position of influence, and I think it puts you in a position of proximity.
That's ridiculous.
And it appears to me that you're turning your board seat into a money-making enterprise for your own company. And you can tell us that we're doing something wrong because people that run campaigns go solicit donations, but a $1.2 million contract with a $120,000 profit, and you're talking about potentially more work while you're on a school tour with a contractor, I don't care if it's ethics or not. That's a problem.
I got my hand up.
Mr. Lovelace.
Okay, Mr. Hughes, did we bid that job with you?
Yes, sir.
Were we low bidder?
You were.
Did we do anything other than bid something for you and were awarded it because we were low bidder?
No, sir.
Did we do anything unethical that you know of?
Not as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
I don't
Did we,
get into
we
the
didn't,
board
here again, we, Loveless Commercial Contracting, didn't use its influence. We bid on a job, we were low bidder, and you working for the state of South Carolina, right?
Correct.
Okay, am I supposed to not work for the state of South Carolina, I guess, because I live here and I could use influence to get a job that I bid and I was low bidder on? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And beside that, if I were supposed to be your, hugged up tight to you guys, which that's the first job we've ever done,
Second.
would I be giving you a hard time, the way you look at things? I mean, that's stupid. I mean, I'm not giving you a hard time. I'm trying to be fair and square.
You've clarified that.
And you know what I'm saying? I mean, the logic of that makes no sense, does it?
I'll be quick.
Didn't to me.
Okay, so, I don't get the whole thing. I mean,
Ms. Hammond.
I just don't get the whole thing. John Farley and my dad went back a long way. I know that. I never worked for John other than
Valentine Elementary. That was the only other job.
Did we do anything on that?
Mm-hmm. You did the slab job, the slab work.
Oh, that was
good.
on a unit price basis?
That's right.
Okay.
Bruce, I think.
Ms. Hammond.
Bruce that used to work
No,
there?
Bruce is my brother.
Mr. Lovelace, I'm
That's
recognizing.
not my company.
I'm recognizing Ms. Hammond.
Maybe it wasn't.
Mr. K.
That's not my
Okay.
company.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, it's a long
Sorry.
time.
Ms. Hammond.
Sorry, I didn't remember correctly.
I really think we need to end this long conversation. I'm thinking of principals out here, teachers. I've got some kids that are going to be looking at me at 8, 10
I
in the
agree, Ms.
morning.
Hammond.
And please help us, Mr. Chair. I just really think.
So we're wrapping that. I want to recap.
Well, I understand you wanted to.
No, we're
hear it,
moving.
but
I want
it's a little late.
to recap. Let's not lose sight of the exceptional product that exists as Piney Woods Elementary. And there's going to be a day when Ms. Pascal stands and greets students. Those lives are going to be changed because of the teachers and the faculty and staff that are going to walk through those doors. I think the design fosters a learning environment that will be emulated across the state and the region. I was so impressed with designing, taking a look at the students, and then figuring out how to design brick and mortar, and not just taking brick and mortar and say, how do we put students in this space? So let's not lose sight of where we're going, and that's to celebrate when we get to open Piney Woods. My understanding from all the conversation tonight, and Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Neal, Mr. Quackenbush, Mr. Hughes, and all the rest of the team, that there have been multiple questions. All of those questions were addressed, and there was no issues within there that had to be redone, corrected, that you went to the expense to test over and above what was required, and at some point, I would like us to have kind of an accounting for what all of this extra examination has cost. So I intend to wrap this discussion up here, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn and place the 2 remaining items on a future agenda. Ms. Hutchison,
I move that we adjourn.
is there a second? Ms. Hammond, as many as favor the motion to adjourn will raise their hand. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and especially for such a late hour, and thank you to our faculty and staff.